Hi everyone, I'm Joanne and welcome to Chop Chat Cook. Today I've got Maria in my kitchen. Welcome Maria.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for being here.
It's great.
And today we're going to be talking about lifelong learning. And Maria, just tell us a little bit about yourself. What's your background?
Okay, well given we're talking about lifelong learning, I'll talk about my history of study. So rather than lifelong learning, I think it's probably more, in my case, lifelong study, because I believe that everyone has lifelong learning skills. Every day people learn something new. So I'm a lifelong studier, I suppose. So I've just submitted my doctoral thesis and it's gone to external examiners yesterday.
Congratulations.
So, yes.
Gosh, how exciting is that?
It is exciting. It's the end of a very long road for me, 7 years of blood, sweat and tears.
Yeah, that's impressive. That's really impressive. And part-time you
Part-time
studied?
and I was studying, working full-time at the same time. So studying part-time and working full-time, so it's been quite an effort to do that.
That's much harder, isn't it, than I think studying full-time.
Yes,
and
most definitely.
Yeah.
You have to be very motivated, that's for sure.
Oh, I think that's a really hard slog. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Now we're just going to have a cup of coffee and a cup of tea and sort of chat. I know that you've done lots of other things as well, like study-wise, haven't you?
Yes, as soon as I left school, I embarked on university study, but found that life got in the way. I discovered a whole different world outside of university, or outside of school, where I was socialising more. We were becoming young adults and having a good time, and that sort of got in the way of study somewhat. So I actually withdrew from study before the end of my first semester straight out of school. I suppose even to get to senior was a bit of a miracle for me. At the end of year 10, my mother and father both worked labouring and manual sort of jobs, and my mother worked in a kitchen, and she'd said, oh, there's a role going in the kitchen where she worked. And my father said, well, why do you want to go and do senior anyway? You're only going to get married and have children anyway. And that sticks in my head even all this time later, that was... I had the ability, but my father just thought, well, you're only going to get married and have children anyway, so what was the point? And I think it's that, when I look back, that really set me on the study path, that I knew I had it in me to do well studying, even though that little foray straight out of school and into university didn't really set me in good stead for that. But I had the determination I wanted to finish my studies, so or to finish my university degree. If I started something, I wanted to finish it.
Yeah.
So I then went back and started another degree. I'd been married and had a young child at that I was pregnant actually, and I went back and studied part-time, discovered you can actually study at university part-time. So that's what I did. I started that, and it was the same degree that I'd commenced back in after I left school, and I thought, well, this isn't really working for me. It was just too difficult. It was on campus. And then I discovered external study.
Oh, right.
And basically, University of Queensland offered, through distant education, what I could do in my the degree that I had started at Griffith Uni, but they offered it externally.
Right.
Yeah,
oh, that's great.
Yeah, it worked out really well. And I was just outside the Brisbane city limits, and to study through distant ed at UQ, you couldn't be a resident of Brisbane, and I was in Browns Plains in Logan City. So that's what got me the foot in the door. And it was, I just found a way of studying that suited me, that I could work, study part-time. I was working part-time at that stage. My son, I'd had my baby after the second attempt at studying. This was my third attempt. I'd had my son and I decided I'm going to give this a go. And I found it worked for me.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, I think that's really inspirational, isn't it, for other people? Because I think it's quite common for, for students to start at university and realise, perhaps for lots of different reasons that maybe that's not quite the right timing for them.
And that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Both those attempts for me, I wasn't mature enough, I didn't have money, there were financial struggles straight out of school, and I just needed to go out and experience the world. And I had got a job and was working at a university at that particular point, and being surrounded by academics helped motivate me to continue to study. So yeah, and so it worked out really well. So that was a part-time studying, and I'd had a few hiccups along the way, family health issues and so forth, but I finished that in 7 years and waddled across the stage, largely pregnant with my third child.
Oh, your third child. Oh, that's great.
So I had another child in partway through that degree, and then I had my third child hugely pregnant, waddling across the stage at University of Queensland for my graduation.
That's really
ceremony.
exciting, isn't it? That's great.
Yeah, it was
so
great.
What did you do that in?
I did that. That was a Bachelor of Arts. I was always interested in environmental studies, which is what I had started at Griffith University. And in the arts degree, it allowed you to taste test different topics, and so I was able to do that. So I ended up doing in an arts degree what's called a spatial technologies major. So that's remote sensing and geographic information systems. So all these wonderful GPS type things and maps that you use these days, way back when I was studying it, that was sort of unheard of. It was almost like science fiction, but it was the starting point of that.
It's moved a lot since then, hasn't it?
It certainly has. It certainly has. And I also did an economics major because I could never understand things on television about politics and macroeconomic policy and running of businesses. So I also did an economics major. So that's the wonderful thing about an arts degree.
Yeah, no, I think that's really inspirational, isn't it? Because there's lots of different paths, isn't there, to where you want to go?
There certainly is. And so by the time I'd finished, I had 3 young children, and it was really hard for me to work full time with the 3 young children. So I continued working at the university, but I found a role in an environmental centre, and I worked there subsequently for a long period of time.
And that's when I met you, because we have a mutual friend.
We certainly do.
And also when I started studying at university, the same university where you were working. So that was back in the 80s as well.
Yes.
And it's a small world.
We have connections.
Yeah, it is. It's a small world, isn't it? Oh, no, that's... So then, so you stayed in that university environment then, haven't you, for quite a long time?
Yes, I did. And then, but I thought I was in more management roles, and I thought, I had this urge to study again. And I went along to a tertiary expo at the exhibition grounds, and I went along expecting to look at Masters of MBAs. And I ended up coming out with brochures for primary teaching.
Oh.
And the one that took my fancy was at University of New England, and it was I could do it part-time, distant ed, and so I enrolled in that, and I thought, it was something I'd always wanted to do when I was younger, was to be a teacher. But as I progressed through school and I saw what teachers had to be subjected to in terms of behaviour,
it's tough, isn't it? It's tough.
It was. I decided, no, I don't think that's for me. I'm not the personality that would be able to deal with it. But when I had young children of my own, I thought, okay, that might be an option for me. So I did enrol in a primary teaching postgraduate diploma at UNE, and that took me 3 years part-time study to do in the late 90s.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, and so my next foray into study was, unfortunately, when I was partway through studying at UNE, Queensland, it was called it's now Queensland College of Teachers, it was the Board of Teacher Registration, decided that a 1-year postgraduate qualification wasn't good enough to let people loose in the school system.
Oh, okay.
So they then made it that you had to have 2-year postgraduate training.
2 years.
And so I was still working at Griffith University, and in the department where I was working in environmental sciences, they offered a Masters of Environmental Education. And so literally the person who coordinated that program was just along the passageway from me. So I enrolled in that 6 months after I finished my grad dip ed, and didn't go teaching straight away. By the time I'd finished that, again, 2.5 years part-time study later, decided now it's the time for me to move and do something that I've actually done a degree in. So I did go teaching for 4 years.
Oh, did you? What did you
Teaching.
teach? Oh, primary school.
It was primary teaching. I took the easy option. Those high school kids were still scaring me.
They're
My
pretty
children were
challenging.
they certainly were.
Yeah.
I sort of regret to a certain extent that I took what I thought was an easier option, and I really wish that I had done high school teaching now. But sliding doors, things would have been different then, and I've had a really good experience as a result of that. So I did teach, and for 4 years, and during that time I was on a contract relieving for the teaching principal at Rocklea State School, a very small school in a low-income area on the south side of Brisbane. So I really enjoyed that particular teaching role and had the opportunity to step into their science teaching role.
Oh.
Because it was such a small school, they had a lot of non-contact time, and so they were able to have extra teaching for the students in specific areas. And teaching science is one of those tough things in primary school that involves putting in a lot of preparation, a lot of effort to make it interesting for the students. And it was offered to me, and I just thought, yep, with my background and love of science, I'll just dive in and start teaching it. And it was a fantastic experience, and I just
You loved it.
I loved it. So that sort of set me up well for what I did later in my life in more recent years, the last 10 years, working in universities and doing science outreach into schools.
And science is so important, isn't it?
It certainly is.
Yeah.
When I was in my second year equivalent of studying for my very first degree, the arts degree, my husband had an aneurysm, and he required brain surgery, and I still chipped away during his recovery and was studying. I remember I was doing economic subjects at that particular semester, and I was doing them externally through Deakin because UQ was winding up their program at that point. So I was dealing with that, and my son was 3, and so on.
So very young.
Yeah, so my eldest son was only 3, and on his 3rd birthday, my husband was in hospital, and I'd taken all of Laurie's birthday things up to celebrate his birthday with my husband, who unfortunately was recovering from brain surgery and had his head shaved and stitches and was looking very forlorn. So we got through that, and Terry recovered, and in a couple of months' time was back at work as an electrician, and he then... I noticed one day my son had this extraordinarily long sleep. This was only, keeping in mind, this was only about 3 months after my husband's aneurysm. And it was very odd, and I went to wake my son up, and he just wasn't waking up, and I was touching his legs and noticed that one calf muscle seemed to have a cramp in it. Oh. And when he stood up, he had this big lump on the side of his leg when he finally woke up. And that was about 6 o'clock at night, after about a 6-hour sleep.
Goodness.
And I thought, we must have knocked it or something, and I left it a few days to see how it went, and in the end took him along to the doctors because he was still running and walking and everything, only to discover that he had a very rare form of cancer. As the specialist said, it's rare as hen's teeth, this particular form of cancer. So that was a whole year of chemotherapy.
That's terrible, isn't it?
And coping with that. And he had his leg amputated, and he coped well with that. We all coped well with that sort of thing, and moved on with life. So it was a tragic sort of turn of events for that particular year. So
that sounds like a really difficult year.
But it's not a good thing, but one of the things that the medical team suggest is just continue on with your life. Everyone's first reaction in those sort of circumstances are just to throw up their arms and go, no, that's it, I'm quitting my job and we're doing this and that. And they said, no, maintain a normal life. And that included study, and it included me working part-time, and my husband was still recovering from his aneurysm, but we got through that. And
was that good advice?
It was good advice, and I followed that all the way through to even during my doctorate, which it has taken me the last 7 years. My husband got ill. and subsequently died of cancer. So all through that, you know, just bearing in mind what that medical team had said many, many years ago, and just continued to study as best I could in those circumstances. I was interviewing student ambassadors for my research at that point.
Oh, okay.
And just chipped away doing that, and I was working full time at that time. So I was very fortunate that I was working in an environment.
That's a busy time, isn't it?
Yes, certainly was. Certainly was. But all through it, we got, got through
there.
that and got through the study, and So each of those degrees have come with a memory of not so good times.
No, but you've done well. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You know,
sometimes it seemed a challenge, but I coped with it.
You certainly had some challenges there, didn't you?
Most definitely.
Yeah. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. So I don't know where this is going to take me. Every degree I've done, I've never quite known where it was going to take me. I had an idea of where I thought I would, but I never quite ended up there. So I'm leaving my options open, job hunting at the moment, seeing where that will take me with the very diverse but sort of narrowing skills, pointed skill sets that I'm attaining.
And I think that's a really good point, because you're pivoting in your career as you need to, aren't you? And taking advantages of opportunities as they come up.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's the best way to look at it.
Yeah.
I was once asked in a job interview for my most recent role that I had at universities, you've had a very diverse background. And I likened it to climbing a pine tree, where you started on a certain path, heading to the top of the pine tree, got along, moved across the first branch, climbed up on that branch, and something else came along and it moved you across. And gradually I can see that I'm reaching the top of that tree. Not quite sure how far the top of that tree is, but I'm pretty sure I'm getting closer.
No, I like that analogy. That's great.
They thought it was a bit weird analogy, but I got the job, so it must have worked.
So they must have liked it. I think that's great. So just in closing, was there anything sort of funny final words that you'd like to say?
Yes.
To our audience?
Life is lifelong learning anyway, so you're all doing it, but if study takes your fancy, it can be quite addictive, as I've proven, and go for it. You'll find that there'll be ways and means around reaching the goal that you want in terms of your study. In terms of the outreach that I was doing to schools, I was working with low-income schools, and these were students that had no idea about any further education, whether it's TAFE or universities on their horizon. So we always talked about pathways, so there's pathways that you can choose. So if you don't think you've got what it takes, rethink it, because there's always a pathway for you.
That's right. No, that's great. Thank you. And I think just ending on that, climb that pine tree.
Yep.
And follow those branches.
Most definitely.
On the way to the top.
That's it.
Yeah. Oh, well, thanks, Maria.
Thank you.
That's
great. It's great chatting to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks
Everyone.
Thanks.
Stay tuned for the next episode.